It was not supposed to be this way. When the Zorath, the technologically advanced race from the farthest reaches of the galaxy, first arrived on Earth, they came with hopes of peaceful interaction. They had observed human civilization for centuries through their sophisticated interstellar surveillance systems, but nothing prepared them for the chaos that erupted upon their arrival. Zora, an experienced diplomat and representative of the Zorath people, watched in disbelief as the human response to their peaceful arrival turned into a mess of conflict, fear, and irrational behavior. Their first message had been simple and clear: we come in peace. Our intention is to share knowledge and technology with your species to help you overcome the challenges that plague your world. The humans, as Zora had anticipated, did not receive this well. Some nations welcomed the aliens, eager to benefit from advanced knowledge and technology. Others, however, reacted with panic and suspicion. "This is a mistake," Zora muttered, adjusting her communication visor. "They are not ready for this. I should have seen it coming." The human response to the Zorath's peaceful overtures was bewildering. Military leaders in the U.S. launched airstrikes against the ships. In Russia, the government declared martial law. In China, hundreds of protesters began chanting in the streets, some claiming that the aliens were part of a global conspiracy to control humanity. Zora's team had barely managed to keep the communication lines open after the initial misunderstanding. But even then, it was clear that the human reaction was unpredictable. Where one group extended a hand in friendship, another would act with hostility. Chapter 2: The Nature of Madness. Zora had read about humanity's strange history before coming to Earth. Wars, revolutions, irrational leaders, and short-sighted decisions all seemed to form a backdrop to the human story. But experiencing it firsthand was far more chaotic than she could have imagined. The Zorath had dealt with countless species in their millennia-long history. Most civilizations had their issues: violence, greed, and mistrust were common. However, there was something different about humanity. They weren't just irrational, they were consistently unpredictable, as if no one could ever be certain how they would react to any given situation. Zora sat in the conference room aboard the Zorath flagship, now hovering above Earth. Her mind was racing. The Zorath had long given up on any species that resorted to violence upon first contact. But humans, they were different. "Do you really think they're insane?" Drax, one of her colleagues, asked, his voice a low hum through the comm system. He had worked with many species, but even he couldn't fathom what was happening. "They're not insane in the traditional sense, Drax," Zora replied, tapping the data screen in front of her. "But there's something deeply unstable about them. It's as if their impulses are constantly in conflict with their reasoning. One moment they want to cooperate, the next, they want to destroy." Drax seemed to pause. "You know what the data says. Their mental patterns are completely chaotic. We can't predict what they'll do next. Their systems of government are so fragile, constantly shifting between conflicting ideologies. It's perplexing." "That's what I mean," Zora said. "They do not respond as we would expect. And I'm not sure they even know what they want." Chapter 3: The Conflict Deepens. The Zorath decided to meet with Earth's representatives, hoping that direct communication could alleviate some of the growing tension. Zora prepared herself for another round of frustration. The humans were not easy to understand. When she arrived at the designated meeting location, a vast conference hall in Geneva, she saw the leaders of the world's greatest powers gathered in one place. The tension in the room was palpable. "We welcome the Zorath to our planet," President Harris of the United States began, his voice heavy with suspicion. "But make no mistake, we will defend our world from any hostile intent." Zora, still attempting to maintain a calm demeanor, responded, "We are not here to conquer, only to offer assistance in exchange for peaceful cooperation. Your species has great potential, but you are fragmented, divided by ideologies and fear." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the leaders from Russia, a man named Anatoly Vasilyev, stood up, shaking his head. "Your assistance is a thinly veiled attempt to control us. We are not your experiment." Zora could feel the weight of the tension increase. She attempted to reason with them. We come from a place of peace. We wish to share knowledge. You expect us to believe you? President Harris interrupted. After centuries of watching us, you've decided now is the time to help. How convenient. We don't need your help. We've survived this long without your superior knowledge. Zora's patience was starting to wear thin. The humans had the potential to become allies, but their deeply entrenched suspicion was something the Zorath had never encountered before. Every attempt at peace seemed to be met with aggression or disbelief. We are not your enemies, she said, more firmly this time. I came here because I believe you have the potential to achieve much more than you have. But this paranoia, it is not sustainable. Chapter 4: The Madness Unleashed. Things took a turn for the worse after that meeting. The global response to the Zorath's visit fractured even further. Various factions within Earth's governments began to rise in opposition to each other. Militias and extremist groups grew in number, spurred on by the fear of alien influence. For every scientific community that wished to learn from the Zorath, there were governments and corporations who saw their arrival as an existential threat to power and control. Soon, the world descended into chaos as protests turned violent and governments crumbled under the weight of internal divisions. Zora and her team watched in horror as humans fought not just against the aliens, but against themselves. It was as if the arrival of a superior intelligence only amplified the madness that already existed in their world. In just a matter of weeks, military coups, religious factions, and anarchist movements erupted across the globe. Earth was in disarray, and the Zorath who had come in peace were being blamed for everything from economic collapse to global warming. They're destroying themselves, Zora said, watching footage of riots and civil wars unfold across the planet. Why would they do this? Chapter 5: The Final Observation. Zora knew the time for diplomacy was nearing its end. She had spent months trying to reason with the humans, trying to show them the benefits of cooperation. But it seemed that humanity was doomed to self-destruct. Their obsession with power, their need for control, and their inability to accept help from any external source, all of it was leading them down a path of destruction. I don't know how to stop it, Zora confided to her colleague Drax as they looked down at the burning cities on Earth. Maybe we were wrong to believe they could change. They're insane. They can't even accept the help they need. Drax said nothing at first, but then, after a long pause, he spoke. Perhaps the true insanity is in trying to make sense of their madness. They are not like us. Their world is full of contradictions, and yet they continue. They're chaotic, unpredictable, but they survive. Perhaps that is the nature of their insanity. Zora shook her head. I don't know if that's enough. Chapter 6: The Decision. The Zorath fleet, once poised to help, began to pull back. Earth had shown them something strange, something beyond their understanding. No race they had encountered in their long history had been so full of potential and yet so deeply fractured. Humanity was a paradox, intelligent but irrational, creative but destructive. Zora's final report to the Zorath Council was filled with both hope and regret. Humans are insane, she wrote. They hold the key to their own survival, yet they insist on fighting it. Their minds, their instincts, their very nature is chaotic. But in that chaos, they persist. The decision was made: the Zorath would leave Earth for now. They would return to the stars, their interest in Earth and its people suspended for an indefinite period. Chapter 7: The Aftermath. It had been 6 months since the Zorath fleet left Earth's orbit. The aliens, once heralded as saviors and feared as conquerors, had vanished as abruptly as they arrived, leaving behind a world in disarray. Their departure was met with a strange mixture of relief and confusion. Humanity had always been capable of enduring great challenges, but now, facing the consequences of their chaotic reactions, the true nature of their struggle was becoming clear. President Harris had resigned after the failure of the diplomatic talks. The United States government was in shambles, divided between factions that either wanted to continue to resist alien contact or, ironically, now wanted to embrace it even more than before. Global alliances had fractured further, and the few remaining stable governments had little power to unite the divided populace. In the chaos, smaller extremist groups were becoming louder, fueling a new round of violence and paranoia. But in the midst of this turmoil, something strange began to emerge. Across the world, in the smallest pockets of peace, a new movement was growing. Leaders, scientists, and thinkers who had once been sidelined by the global panic now found themselves rising to the surface, working together to rebuild. It was in these moments of quiet rebellion against the chaos that some humans began to see what the Zorath had missed in their assessment, a potential for unity. Chapter 8: Fragments of Hope. Dr. Naomi Albright had seen the writing on the wall long before the Zorath arrived. A historian, Naomi had studied humanity's propensity for conflict, irrationality, and fear. She had written papers on the cyclical nature of human violence and the hope that was often born from it. But when the Zorath came, and then left, she had found herself caught between two impossible truths: humanity's fragility and its indomitable spirit. Now, as the dust settled from the chaos, Naomi found herself part of an underground movement, one of many groups of humans who had finally come together to rebuild after the Zorath had left. These groups weren't ideologically unified. They didn't agree on everything. Some wanted to re-establish old power structures, while others saw this as the opportunity to dismantle them entirely. But despite their differences, Naomi and the others shared one thing in common: a realization that humanity needed to learn from its past mistakes. They needed to address the root of their own madness, the irrational fears, the destructive impulses, the refusal to compromise. "I don't think the Zorath will return anytime soon," Naomi said to her small group of colleagues, who were gathered in a makeshift conference room under an old library. "But we still have to prepare for whatever the future holds. If we don't start working together now, if we don't address the systemic issues that caused all this chaos, we'll be no better than we were before." The Zorath might have been right. They might have seen our madness too clearly. Her words echoed in the room. There were murmurs of agreement, but Naomi knew the path forward wouldn't be easy. It had never been. Chapter 9: The Divided World. Back in the remnants of what was once known as the United States, the state of disarray continued. The country was no longer a singular entity. Instead, it was a fractured patchwork of city-states, militias, and rogue governments. Local leaders who once thought themselves powerless were now assuming more control as national governments collapsed under their own weight. "Order is a distant memory," Marcus Hayes, a former soldier turned leader of a new faction in the Midwest, said in a recorded broadcast. "But that's the beauty of this madness. It forces us to adapt. We must accept that things will never go back to the way they were, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we don't need a single government. Maybe we can form a new kind of society." Marcus' words resonated across the country, especially with the groups who had always resented centralized power. But his vision was not without its critics. Many believed that any division would lead to further fragmentation and that humanity's ultimate survival depended on re-establishing order, even if that meant working with whatever remnants of government still existed. In Europe, a similar debate unfolded. The European Union, which had once been a symbol of cooperation, was now struggling to remain intact. The rise of extremist nationalist movements across the continent threatened to unravel decades of progress. Leaders like Victor Fischer, a former EU diplomat, pushed for global cooperation, emphasizing that humanity's survival depended on unity rather than division. "We cannot afford the luxury of fractured thinking," Fischer argued in his public speeches. The Zorath were right about one thing: we are fragmented. But that fragmentation is a threat to our very survival. Only by coming together can we rebuild our planet and avoid the same mistakes that nearly destroyed us. Despite his passionate calls for unity, Fischer found himself in constant opposition to the growing factions that believed humanity should reject any future involvement with extraterrestrial civilizations. These groups, who had once feared the Zorath, now believed that any attempt at unity with the wider galactic community would lead to domination. Chapter 10: The Return of the Zorath. It was an unexpected occurrence that would shape the future of Earth's conflict. The Zorath were returning. After months of observing, they had determined that humanity was too volatile to abandon completely. Their own internal debates had led them to one conclusion: despite humanity's erratic behavior, they had potential to change, to adapt, and perhaps even to evolve beyond their madness. Zora, still processing the chaotic events of the initial contact, stood at the helm of the Zorath flagship as it re-entered Earth's orbit. Her colleagues were nervous. They had assumed that humanity's failure to cooperate would prevent them from ever returning. But Zora had fought for this moment. She believed that there was a seed of sanity buried deep within the chaos of human behavior. "We've underestimated them," Zora admitted to Drax, her tone somber. "They might be insane, but they're also incredibly resilient. I think we have one more chance to help them." But the question remained: would humanity accept the help this time? Could the Zorath and humans coexist, or would the madness reign once more? Chapter 11: The Choice. The re-emergence of the Zorath did not come without its own set of challenges. Earth's various factions, already weary and distrustful of each other, now faced the prospect of alien intervention once again. Some welcomed the Zorath back with open arms, seeing it as an opportunity to rebuild what had been lost. Others saw the return as a final betrayal. Naomi, caught in the middle of this resurgence, found herself once again working toward peace, though this time, the challenges were far greater. She had hoped that humanity might have learned from the Zorath's initial departure, but the global distrust was even worse than before. Everyone wanted answers, but no one wanted to listen. Zora, standing on Earth once again, broadcast a message across the planet. "We are not here to control you. We are here to offer you what we can: a chance to evolve beyond the chaos that has consumed your world. The choice is yours. But this time, know that our patience is limited." As Zora's words echoed across the airwaves, the world held its breath. Humanity was being offered a chance, an opportunity to rise above its insanity. But would they take it? Or would their own madness destroy the fragile peace before it even had a chance to bloom? Chapter 12: A New Beginning. The final chapter of this story remains unwritten, for humanity's fate has yet to be decided. Would they finally embrace unity, knowing that their survival depended on it? Or would they fall into their old patterns of destruction and chaos? The Zorath, watching from the shadows, were uncertain. They had come to Earth in peace, but the humans, unstable, unpredictable, and maddening, might yet surprise them once again. In the end, the true test would be whether humanity could learn to balance their insanity with their incredible potential for greatness. And as the stars watched silently from above, the future of Earth hung in the balance. Chapter 13: Tipping Point. Months had passed since the Zorath returned, and the world was still in turmoil. The great hope that humanity might embrace their assistance was slipping away, replaced by rising fears, conflicting ideologies, and continued distrust. While some governments opened their doors to the Zorath, others began to rally against their presence, accusing them of manipulating Earth's people for their own benefit. Even those who had once welcomed the alien presence now found themselves questioning if the Zorath's return was truly for humanity's good. Dr. Naomi Albright, still at the heart of the movement for cooperation, watched in frustration as the world danced dangerously close to the edge of another conflict. She had worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the various factions, to convince humanity that this moment could be one of unprecedented unity, but the results had been mixed at best. The division between the pro-Zorath factions and the anti-alien extremists had deepened. Every time Naomi thought progress had been made, new tensions arose. Violent protests in the streets, aggressive political rhetoric, and the sudden appearance of radical groups preaching anti-alien and anti-global cooperation sentiments spread like wildfire. "The problem," Naomi said in a rare meeting with a few allies, "is not just the Zorath anymore. It's the human mind. We've spent so long fighting each other, it's hard to imagine a way forward that doesn't feel like surrender to some faction or ideology." In the underground meeting room, her colleagues nodded in agreement, the weight of their shared frustration settling over them. "The truth is," said one of them, a former diplomat named Aiden Gray, "we're facing the biggest challenge of all, not from the Zorath, but from ourselves. We can't seem to shake the fear of being controlled, no matter how much proof we're given that they're here to help us." Naomi sighed, her gaze falling on a holographic map of the world. "The Zorath believe we have potential to evolve. They've offered us technology, knowledge, resources, but instead of using them to rebuild, we fight over whether we even deserve them." Chapter 14: A World on the Brink. In major cities across the globe, the chaos had not subsided. In New York, the tensions between factions boiled over into a full-scale confrontation. Anti-alien protesters clashed with groups advocating for cooperation with the Zorath. Police forces, overwhelmed and underprepared for such widespread disorder, struggled to maintain any semblance of order. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the Russian Federation government, led by the hard-line military faction of General Ivanov, rejected the Zorath's overtures entirely. Ivanov saw their technology as a threat to Russian sovereignty and had mobilized his forces to engage in a tense standoff with the remaining pro-Zorath factions. The Russian military had begun stockpiling advanced weapons, fearing that any move by the Zorath would lead to an invasion. Across the oceans in Beijing, the Chinese government took a different approach. They had cautiously embraced the Zorath's offer of technological advancements, but insisted on strict terms that the aliens found difficult to accept. In a confidential briefing, one of the Zorath officials, Talrith, reported back to Zora, "Every time we attempt to engage them with our technology, they hesitate. The Chinese are deeply distrustful of any power beyond their borders, fearing a loss of control. We are being met with resistance from every corner of the Earth." Zora stood at the helm of her ship, staring at the Earth below through a panoramic window. "We are here to help, Talrith." "Why don't they see that?" "They see only the past," Talrith replied. "The history of human conflict, of greed and war. They are blind to the future we offer." Chapter 15: The Unlikely Alliance. Naomi had grown used to the constant disappointment, but she had also learned not to give up. Despite the growing unrest, there were still small signs of hope. A few leaders in Africa, South America, and parts of Europe had begun to set aside old rivalries and were actively working toward a new model of global cooperation, one where the Zorath's technology could be used to help reverse climate change, provide sustainable energy, and even begin the healing of the scars left by years of conflict. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. One evening, Naomi received an encrypted message from a surprising source, Marcus Hayes, the leader of a Midwest faction of humans who had once rejected the Zorath entirely. "I know you think we're part of the problem, Naomi," the message began. "But I'm starting to believe we might be able to do something with the Zorath. Something that can bring real change. Let's talk. It's time to stop fighting against each other and start fighting for something better." Naomi was taken aback. Marcus Hayes was known for his fierce stance against any alien intervention, and yet here he was, reaching out in a moment of vulnerability. A chance for cooperation? Could it be real? After a long pause, she responded, "Meet me in Paris. I'll be there in 2 days." Chapter 16: The Secret Meeting. The Paris skyline shimmered in the distance as Naomi and Marcus met in a secret location. Their conversation began tentatively, each of them circling around the larger issue: how to stop humanity from tearing itself apart while also addressing the alien presence that had shaken their world to its core. "I never thought I'd be sitting across from you like this," Marcus said, running a hand through his hair. "A few months ago, we would have shot at each other on sight. Now, we have to figure out how to make this work." "I'm glad you're here," Naomi replied. "It's hard to admit, but I think you're right. We can't keep running in circles. The Zorath are here, and they're trying to help. But the question is, what do we do next?" Marcus leaned forward. "We can't unite humanity through fear of the Zorath. We've tried that, and it's failed. We need a common cause. Maybe we need to fight together, not against the Zorath, but against our own tendencies. The real enemy isn't the aliens, it's the fear, the division, and the mistrust. Naomi nodded slowly. You're right. We've been so busy fighting them, we haven't realized that the real challenge is fighting ourselves. Our tendency to destroy what we don't understand. Marcus looked her in the eyes. It's time to give humanity a reason to believe in something bigger than themselves. If we can convince our people that cooperation is the only way forward, then maybe, just maybe, we'll have a shot. The conversation shifted from theories to action. They discussed an urgent message they planned to send to every nation on Earth. A call to come together, to stop the violence, and to finally confront the real cause of their suffering, their own divisiveness. Naomi felt a sense of urgency she hadn't felt in weeks. This could be the moment that changed everything, or it could be yet another failed attempt. Chapter 17, A New Path Forward. Naomi and Marcus worked tirelessly over the next few days, drafting their message. They worked alongside a coalition of scientists, diplomats, and activists from various nations. The message was simple: the time to choose is now. Will we continue down the path of destruction, or will we embrace unity and face the future together? The final version was broadcast globally, reaching every corner of the earth. In a joint statement, Naomi and Marcus appealed to humanity's better nature. We are faced with an unprecedented opportunity. The Zoroath are here not to dominate, but to offer us a path to healing. We can use their knowledge, their technology, to rebuild our world, but only if we stop fighting each other. It is time to put our differences aside and confront our collective future. We can either evolve or continue down the path of madness. The choice is ours. The response was immediate. Pro-Zoroath factions saw it as a breakthrough. Anti-alien groups remained skeptical but grudgingly accepted that cooperation might be the only way to avoid total collapse. It was not a perfect agreement, but it was a step forward. A fragile step, but a step nonetheless. Chapter 18, The Future Unfolds. As the Zoroath watched from their ships above Earth, they remained uncertain. The outcome was still unclear, but for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. Humanity had chosen to face the challenge together. Naomi stood on the balcony of a newly established peace center in Paris, watching as the sun set over the city. Beside her, Marcus stood in quiet contemplation. We may not have won yet, Naomi said softly, but this is the first real chance we've had. Marcus turned to her. The fight isn't over. But for the first time, it feels like we have a chance to change. The future of humanity remained uncertain, but there was one thing that was clear: the choice was theirs. Would they continue their descent into madness, or would they find the strength to build a new world, united in purpose? As the stars twinkled above, Earth held its breath, waiting for the answer. Chapter 19, The Final Decision. The world had entered a precarious moment. For the first time in decades, humanity faced the crossroads of its future. The divisions that had plagued Earth for so long were still there, but now, there was something different. The question was no longer if humanity could change, but how they would choose to evolve. Naomi stood at the steps of the newly rebuilt United Nations Assembly, surrounded by leaders from across the globe. The Great Hall, once a symbol of fractured diplomacy and inaction, now hummed with the weight of decisions that would shape the future of humankind. Behind her, a massive holographic display projected an image of the Zoroath ships hovering above Earth. This was their final offer, the opportunity to join their network of civilizations and access knowledge that would elevate humanity beyond its past. The room was filled with tension. Old political leaders who had once fought tooth and nail for power now stood together, unified only by the weight of this moment. The anti-alien factions, led by the most stubborn of Earth's warlords and nationalists, grumbled in the back, eyes filled with distrust. But the pro-Zoroath factions, those who believed in the possibility of peace and cooperation, had managed to win the majority. Naomi stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She was the one who had bridged the gap, who had fought tirelessly to bring humanity to this point. It had been a struggle, but she knew this was the moment to decide if Earth could evolve beyond its insanity. The room fell silent as she began to speak. "We stand at the precipice of a new beginning," Naomi said, her voice firm but filled with hope. "For centuries, we have fought wars, driven ourselves to the brink of destruction. We have let fear and division control our every action. The Zoroth offered us knowledge, resources, and the chance to become part of something greater than ourselves. But this is not just about accepting their offer, it's about our willingness to change. To leave behind the cycles of violence and destruction." She paused, glancing at the faces of the representatives before her from every corner of the globe. "But we know the risks. We have been given this opportunity before, and we have squandered it. Can we truly unite, not just for the good of Earth, but for the good of our species? The choice is in our hands." A murmur of voices broke out as the leaders began to discuss the words she had spoken. The debate raged in hushed tones, but Naomi's presence held the room. She wasn't just representing a faction, she was the embodiment of what humanity could be if they chose to evolve, to face their fears, and move past their insanity. Chapter 20: The Great Unification. In the following days, the decision was made. It was not unanimous. There were still voices of dissent, factions who refused to bend, who insisted that humanity should remain free from outside influence. But the majority of the world's governments and representatives came together in agreement. Earth would not reject the Zoroth. They would work together to create a new future. The Zoroth had watched from orbit, awaiting the decision. As soon as the global vote was finalized, Zora, the Zoroth envoy, communicated with Naomi. "You have chosen wisely," Zora said, her voice filled with a strange combination of relief and respect. "We will begin the process of sharing our knowledge. We will help you rebuild if you are ready to work together." Naomi looked up at the stars above, the vastness of space stretching out before her. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of peace. "We are ready," she said, her voice steady. Chapter 21: A New Dawn. The years that followed were nothing short of miraculous. Humanity, united under a common cause, began to rebuild the Earth. The Zoroth, true to their word, shared their advanced technology, helping humanity heal the scars of centuries of conflict. Climate change was reversed, diseases eradicated, and resources were distributed equitably to every corner of the globe. But more than just physical healing took place. The war-driven mentality that had once defined humanity's history slowly faded. Humans began to understand the importance of cooperation not just among nations, but among people. The fears that had kept them divided began to dissolve as they realized they had more in common than they had once believed. The global government, though imperfect, was more unified than ever before. Old borders faded into the past as Earth became a single entity, not divided by nations or ideologies, but united by a shared commitment to a better future. Naomi, now an elder stateswoman, watched as the younger generation began to thrive. They had been born into a world of unity and peace, and they knew no other way of life. They were the first truly post-conflict generation, one that would take the lessons of the past and use them to guide their decisions for the future. Chapter 22: Humanity's Choice. As Earth and the Zoroth forged their partnership, humanity also began to look beyond their own planet. The Zoroth offered to take a select group of humans beyond the solar system to visit other worlds and engage with civilizations across the galaxy. It was an invitation to join the interstellar community, but humanity's leaders knew that this next step would be critical. Could they retain the peace they had fought so hard to achieve? Would they stay united in the face of new challenges beyond Earth? Naomi, now older and wiser, stood before a new generation of leaders. "We've learned a lot," she said, "but the greatest lesson is this: we are not perfect, but we are capable of change. The madness of our past may never be completely erased, but it doesn't have to define us. The universe is vast, and our future is as infinite as the stars themselves. It is up to us to shape it." As humanity prepared to reach out into the stars, they knew that the journey ahead would not be without its trials. But for the first time in history, they were no longer shackled by fear or division. They had chosen the path of unity. And as they looked toward the stars, they knew they had made the right choice.